Welcome back to the VFX tutorials, and this time we're going to be doing some very important things, very important basic, and trying things out with my new microphone, which I hope is better. As you can see, we are in Photoshop, and we've got a nice little image here, something that could be an interesting backdrop for lots of things. But today we're going to concentrate on finding perspective in an image and using that to determine where your horizon line is. This is going to be very important as you composite other things into it. If you create any type of 3D element or build this around a 3D scene, you need to know where the horizon is to have your other elements have the correct view and fit in and look like they're supposed to be there. To do this in Photoshop, I'll use something I've been doing for a long time, and that is using the line tool. So right here we have the line tool, and these are in Photoshop's shape tools, which are actually vector tools if you choose the right option. So I will choose the line tool here, and with these various vector tools in this area, you can see the pen tool, everyone's favorite, right? And other shape tools right here. I'll right click there. We'll use the line tool, and you want to make sure that your option here says shape. You have the option of pixels, which really isn't very useful at all. And you also have path, which it's a vector path, but that's only a start to something. You're not really going to get much of the vector path. It needs to have something added to it. What you really want to do is a shape layer. This means a vector shape layer in Photoshop. And Photoshop has a wide variety of vector tools, and they're really nice. If you can use Illustrator, you know them in Photoshop. Make sure we say a shape layer. We've got the tool right here. And we're going to look at the width. Now, the width here is set to 2 pixels, and that should be fine. 1 pixel would be a bit more accurate, but we'll keep 2 pixels. We want to keep very, very thin lines. Another thing we want to do is we're going to determine vanishing points by having what are actual parallel lines, but visually they converge. We're going to find out where they are. So if you remember anything from perspective drawing classes, it'll all come into play here. Obviously, the vanishing points are going to be somewhere outside the image. They're out here, and one is out over here. So we need to be able to work outside the Photoshop canvas. Now, an easy way to do this, if you look at these drawing or viewing modes down here, you will see the various options. Here's one, there's another, that's full screen. Okay, sure, full screen. And I'll hit escape, and we're back to normal. You can also, as one student showed me years ago, just change this mode here by clicking the F on your keyboard. So I'll hit F once, and this is really nice for this type of operation. You can see we lose the actual boundaries of the image. The rulers stay way up here on the edge of the interface. And if I zoom out, you can see that I've got all this area outside of the canvas to work with. So I'll zoom in here, scroll around a bit, and I'm going to put down a line. So I'll start maybe about right here and just drag that down over to about here. This should be somewhere good. And I will let go. And you can see it's created a vector shape layer. That's the second layer there in Photoshop. What's nice about the vector shape layer is that it can't interfere with or draw over pixels in your initial layer. Now I want to add more lines to the same vector shape layer. So I'll hold down the Shift key. You should see a small little plus sign there. And we'll click and drag, and we'll just drag this up by something that should match up and be pretty much parallel. I'll go right here. Great. So we've got these 2 lines, and they aren't where they need to be yet. So if I click off of this, you'll see I don't really have a great color. There's this, whatever you do with your shape layer, you can only have 1 color per layer, and it's going to be whatever your foreground color was here in Photoshop. Now I like to really have these colors stand out, so they're quite visible. So to change the color, there are various ways you can do this, but you can easily just double click on this little thumbnail here. You'll bring up your color picker, and we'll do something like this bright red. Now we can see there's a bright red, and that'll work just fine for us. Now, one thing that I want to point out, and this is a little bit odd, but Photoshop does not like open paths. It really wants all its paths to be closed. And you can see here, these look like two lines. If you can think about line segment tools, say in Illustrator, those are open paths. Well, again, Photoshop doesn't like open paths. So if I zoom in here really, really tight, I'm going to show you what this actually is. There we go. There's the edge of that line. Now I want to edit and move points around. So we'll need the direct selection tool right there. So if I just click and drag this edge, you should see two points. What's happening here is that these points are 4 points of a rectangle. So in Photoshop, lines are actually thin little rectangles. They're not open line segments. That's an important thing to know if you work with lines in Photoshop. Okay, so now that we have that understood, there are going to be 4 points we have to work with. If you were to grab 1 point and move it, you get something crazy like that. Well, we don't want that. So this isn't a line segment tool like in Illustrator where you've got 1 point on each end. You actually have 2 points on each end because it's a long thin rectangle. So as I zoom out, I'll come over here, and this is where those two lines intersect. Well, what that really means is that there are 4 points right here where they intersect. And I want to make sure I grab all 4 of them. So to do that, just grab a little marquee around that. Now they're all 4 selected, and you can bring and you can move these in and try and match up where those should go. So that should be about like that. All right, we'll zoom out a little bit. And you can see what's very handy here, because these are vector tools, they can extend and exist outside of the canvas in Photoshop. If they were pixel-based lines, they couldn't draw out here. They would end right at the canvas. So vector tools are what you want. Plus, look how easy it is to move them around. Really cool. Now we need to add a few more to find out, get another vanishing point. Remember your perspective drawing classes. So we'll get the tool once again. Remember to hold down Shift. I want all these to be on one shape layer. If you don't hold down Shift, it'll make a new shape layer with every vector shape that you draw. So I'll hold down Shift and draw another one out like this. There we go. And I need to have one that should match up, and maybe I'll try the top of this window. So I'll hold down Shift and I will draw one there. What I want to do is I want to match these two up at about the same spot, as close as I can. That's pretty good. Now again, A will get you either the path selection tool, not the selection tool, because that might confuse you with pixel-based selection tools up here. But you're selecting paths, the same as the selection tool in Illustrator, and of course the direct selection tool. So I'm going to grab these right here, and I'm going to move them around until they seem to match up with these lines right here. Okay, that looks like it should be okay. You can always zoom in and see how it looks. You want those to match up there. It doesn't really match up here quite well. But let me use the bottom of this window. I'll grab these 2 points here, move that, and try and do something like that. It might need to go down just a little bit. Something kind of like that there. All right, the idea is you want to have these lines match up where they need to be. That should be pretty good. So I'll zoom out here. What I've done is I've established these 2 vanishing points in perspective. And with the 2 vanishing points here, I'll just go to my rulers and I'll pull down a guide. And what I'm going to see here is that pretty close I get the horizon. Now I'm off a little bit here, but that might just be because my line's not very accurate, or maybe there's some distortion in the lens here. But I can just kind of take that and move that down a little bit more right there. And let's kind of zoom in here and see. Oh, okay. I think I'll just kind of take this line. You can also select it and then use your arrow key up a little bit and kind of shift it out that way. As I come in here, what I should see is that looks pretty good, and that looks pretty good. And now this this image here, I've now, with a high degree of accuracy, determined the horizon in the image. That is the horizon. So if I were to bring this image into a 3D program and I wanted to use it to create some 3D objects that would kind of match the view here, whether it's down here or up here, I'd need to match up that horizon with the horizon in a 3D program. And right here, because you're not going to see the guide here, I might just make another rule. Hold down Shift, and this will not only give me an added line here, but it makes it perfectly horizontal. There we go. And I'll click off of that and then hide the guides there. So right there, that is the horizon in the image. Even though it's hidden, it's completely obscured by this building, that is the horizon. So I could save this image out with these lines intact, use that as the background image in a 3D program, and use the horizon grid and match that up right there. And now I've got the horizon matching up with my image. So really handy things, and it's very important to determine where your horizon is. It's easy if you can actually see the horizon, the edge of a water, the edge of the land or something like that. But again, if it's obscured, you just use this technique right here and determine where those vanishing points are. And vanishing points will always stick to the horizon. Now, since we're talking about perspective, I want to show you one more tool that you might consider for this type of operation. You'll notice that in Photoshop, if you look in filters, there's a vanishing point filter. Now, it's not really a filter. It's more of sort of a mini program within Photoshop. But I want to show you how this works and how it can be helpful for something like this. So first of all, you need to know that vanishing point will only work in RGB mode. So for example, if I were to go to my mode and work in CMYK color, I'll not flatten that. There we go. And go to the filter. Oh, there's no vanishing point. So I'm just going to undo this, undo CMYK. One of the reasons you always want to work with image creation, at least in Photoshop, in RGB. Also, if I were to go to increase my bits per channel. And so now I'm working at 16 bits per channel. Let's see, just double check that. And look at filters. That one still works. Some filters actually might stop working. But I'll go back to, I'll undo 16 bits per channel. For high-end compositing and image creation, you may want to work with that. But for a lot of stuff, 8 bits per channel is going to be just fine. So let's look at this filter right here, the vanishing point filter. Now I want to show you how to use this, so it might be helpful, and maybe show you its limitations as well. The first thing I want to do is I want to make a brand new blank layer. For the moment, I'll turn off these lines. And I want to make a brand new layer, just a normal empty layer. Very important to do any vanishing point work. If you're going to use it, do it on a new empty layer, not on your existing layer. So when I'm on the new layer right here, I'll go to Filter and Vanishing Point. So what you'll see here is you'll see this image, and what Photoshop is going to want you to do, it's going to want you to define a plane. You can't do anything until you define a plane. There's your plane tool right there. In fact, it even tells you, click the four corners of a perspective plane or object in the image to create an editing plane. Okay, so I'm going to look for what would be a flat plane here, and this side of the building should work. So I don't see this edge, but I'll use the edge of this window, or maybe this one right here. And these other lines here that should be perpendicular. So start here and click, and go up to about here, and click, and go to about here, and here. Now, I'm not quite correct, but that's okay. So I've clicked and I've made a plane. And what you want to do at this point is you want to have it match up with the image. Before you do anything else, you've got to get it to match up with the image. So just drag the points and get them to come in there like this. And you can zoom in, use normal keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to use whatever I can in this image to get things to match up with things that are parallel and perpendicular. Realizing that things aren't perfect in real life, but hopefully this will work. Okay, so I've got that right there. So you see how it's matching up with this horizontal line. It's matching up with this horizontal line, hopefully here at the bottom. If I didn't like that one, I could grab this edge and kind of move it and try and match up other things. Looks like it's pretty close. It's looking pretty good. So I've got this one plane defined. I'll zoom out. And what I want you to show here is the grid size. The larger this number, the bigger these grids are going to be. So I can take that and take it down and get more grids in here. And often you might want to get this to where the grids kind of match up with lines already in the image. So that's pretty good right there. So what I've done is I've defined a grid. I've made it work for the image right here. And that looks pretty good. That's about as accurate and close as I can get it. If I need it to extend farther, I can just grab it here and pull it along, and you can see how it moves in perspective. So it's working okay. I can also grab it and drag it up like that. So anyway, all good. Now, we've got some things here. Command drag to create a perpendicular plane. Of course, if you're on a PC, that would be control. So what I want to do is I want to create a second plane that's going to go down, right down this way. And that'll be perpendicular, meaning it creates a 90-degree angle here, of course, in 3D space. So I'll hold down the command or control on the PC, come to this edge here, click and drag, and now I'm going to pull down a perpendicular grid all the way down there. Okay, so far so good. Now as I'm looking at this, it's not quite matching up. I can see the perspective here is a lot more extreme. The vertical perspective is working well. I can see that matching up with the windows, but the horizontal perspective is not matching things here. It's matching here, so this, where we would expect in this photo that this should all work. Obviously, these windows here, the tops should be parallel to each other. So this is actually one shortcoming of the vanishing point tool is you can't really fine tune it. So once I've created this other secondary grid, I can see the two grids here. I can't fine tune it. This one here has to be perfect. And I thought this was perfect, and it actually might be. But somehow with the perspective of this image, maybe it has to do with the lens being used to take the photo, this grid system just isn't really liking it at all. So in this case, it doesn't work, and I can't go in there and manually fine tune it. So these are the limitations of this, even though it is a pretty cool tool. Just to show you some more things that you can do here. If I click on this grid, I can hold down the command once again. I can pull down a perpendicular grid going that way. I can click on this one, and I can pull down a perpendicular grid going that way. I can even take and stretch it out here like that. So you can see that we've got, creating this grid surface here. Kind of move that along and so on. Move that up to kind of match the top of the building. So anyway, it can be helpful. In this case, if I were trying to use this tool for what it's really designed for, cloning and duplicating and painting, you can see that the perspective doesn't quite match here. It looks like it works perfectly on this grid, but with this grid, it just doesn't. I don't really know why, other than it can't take into account the vagaries of different lenses and how they distort the image. But I want to show you something cool that you might be able to use this for. You see, you've created this image right here, and you might want to use this as a guide, so like 3D guidelines instead of 2D guidelines, or something like that. If you want to do that, there's a really nice thing that you can do. Now, it's kind of odd. Look at all this space here and this little mini interface. You don't see anything that would help you out here. Right up here in this crazy little image, which is the settings, if you click on that, you can have this one here so you can actually export this 3D information to various 3D programs and After Effects. But right here you can say render grids to Photoshop. So that's actually pretty nice. Now, why they can't put these options here where they're visible with all this space, I don't know. But you've got to click here, drop down in these options here, click Render Grids to Photoshop. I'll click that. And I haven't done anything here. I haven't done any painting or cloning, but that's okay. If I click OK, now you can see what's happened if I zoom in. It has rendered the complete set of grids to its own layer right there in Photoshop. So that can be pretty handy if you need this 3D grid for part of your design or as a foundation, or again, like I say, like their 3D guidelines. That can be very helpful. But the important thing here is you have to do this on its own separate layer. If I've been clicked on this layer here, it would have rendered the pixels of this grid, and these are just pixels, over this layer and done a permanent change and destroyed the pixels underneath. Come in here and show you what you get. It's kind of ugly. It's completely anti-aliased, or excuse me, aliased. There is no anti-aliasing. It's just completely 100% opaque. There's nothing here that attempts to soften these lines or make them smooth or make them look better. So I kind of wish that they would do that. But there you have it. You can use the vanishing point tool to render a set of grids and help you get your three-dimensional lines and how all the perspective is working and perpendicular and parallel lines here. Or you can manually create your own. In this case, you can be much more exact and precise, and you can fine-tune them. But it's important as you're working with images like this in Photoshop, if you're going to add textures or add other elements, the perspective has to match. So in order for that to happen, remember, you have to find that horizon line, and you have to have everything else match up so that the perspective, the perpendicular, and the parallel lines all match up with your background, your initial plate. If they don't, that's going to be the first key that something is wrong. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and stay tuned for more.